Welcome to the Pursuit Chronicles, where tales of adventure, discovery, and passion unfold through every inspiring journey. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the San Juan Mountains, carrying with it the sharp bite of a Colorado winter. Nestled in a secluded valley where the pines stood like silent sentinels was a sprawling estate that seemed both majestic and mournful. Its stone walls, weathered by decades of storms, loomed over the landscape, a testament to wealth and isolation. This was the home of Emily Harper, a 17-year-old whose life had been irrevocably altered by tragedy. Emily sat by the floor-to-ceiling window of the mansion's library, her wheelchair positioned to catch the faint glow of the afternoon sun. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, framing a face that was striking yet haunted. Her green eyes, once vibrant with the reckless energy of youth, now held a quiet intensity, as if she were constantly searching for something just beyond her reach. 3 years ago, a car accident had stolen her ability to walk, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. The crash had taken more than her mobility. It had fractured her family, leaving scars that no amount of time could heal. The library was her sanctuary, a place where the world's chaos couldn't reach her. Shelves of leather-bound books stretched to the vaulted ceiling, their spines worn from her mother's touch. Margaret Harper had been the heart of this house, a woman of warmth and wisdom who filled every room with laughter. But Margaret was gone now, taken by a relentless illness that had drained her life over the course of a year. Her absence left a void that echoed through the mansion's halls, a silence that Emily felt in her bones. "Emily!" A voice broke the stillness, sharp and impatient. She turned her head slightly, her fingers tightening on the armrests of her wheelchair. James Harper, her father, stood in the doorway. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome, if not for the hardness in his eyes. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, a stark contrast to the casual flannel he'd worn in the days before Margaret's death. At 45, James was a man who commanded attention, a successful real estate developer whose empire spanned Denver and beyond. But to Emily he was a stranger wearing her father's face. "What is it?" she asked, her tone flat. James crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You've been in here all day. Don't you think it's time to get some fresh air?" Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew this game. James had been trying to play the doting father for weeks now, his sudden interest in her well-being as transparent as glass. She wasn't fooled. The man who stood before her was not the father, who had once carried her on his shoulders through the meadows. That man had disappeared long before the accident, replaced by someone whose ambition outweighed his humanity. "I'm fine," she said, turning her gaze back to the window. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow. "I don't need fresh air," James sighed, a sound laced with frustration. "You can't just hide in here forever, Emily. You're 17. You should be out there, living your life." Her jaw clenched. Living my life? She thought bitterly, as if he cared about her life, as if he hadn't been the one behind the wheel that night, the night her world had shattered. The official report called it an accident. A slick road, a sharp turn, a moment of inattention. But Emily's memories, fragmented though they were, told a different story. She remembered the screech of tires, the flash of headlights, and her father's voice calm and cold as the car plummeted off the road. "I said I'm fine," she repeated, her voice sharper now. James studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, as if conceding defeat. "Suit yourself, but we're having dinner together tonight. No excuses." He turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Emily waited until the sound faded before letting out a breath. She hadn't realized she was holding. She reached for the book on her lap, a worn copy of Jane Eyre, and opened it to the page she'd marked. But her eyes didn't see the words. Her mind was elsewhere, tangled in the web of suspicion that had grown thicker with each passing day. James. Harper was not a man accustomed to being denied. In the world of boardrooms and contracts, he was a predator, a man who bent others to his will with a smile and a handshake. But Emily was different. She was his daughter, yes, but she was also a puzzle he couldn't solve, a mirror that reflected his own failures. And now she was something else entirely, a threat. He stood in his study, a glass of bourbon in his hand, staring at the framed photograph on his desk. It was a picture of the three of them, James, Margaret, and Emily, taken years ago during a trip to Aspen. Margaret's smile was radiant, Emily's eyes sparkled with mischief, and James looked like a man who had everything, but that was a lie even then. The truth was he'd always wanted more. Margaret's death had been a blow, not because he loved her, he hadn't loved her in years, but because it exposed the fragility of his empire. She had been the one with the real power, the one whose name was tied to the family's wealth. Her grandfather had built the Harper fortune, a legacy of land and investments that stretched across Colorado. James had married into that legacy, but he'd never truly owned it. And now, with Margaret gone, he was on the verge of losing it all. The Deschutes, Margaret's will, had been a slap in the face. He'd learned of its contents only recently, when Emily's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara Bennett, had visited the estate. Clara had sat across from Emily in the library, her voice steady as she explained the terms. When Emily turned 18, in just 3 months, she would inherit everything: the mansion, the land, the shares in Harper Enterprises, and a trust fund worth tens of millions. James, the man who had built the company into what it was today, was mentioned nowhere in the document. He took a sip of bourbon, the burn of it grounding him. Clara had been careful, speaking only to Emily, but James had his ways of getting information. A few discreet inquiries, a well-placed contact in the law firm, and he'd learned the rest. If Emily died before her 18th birthday, and if she left no will of her own, the estate would pass to her legal guardian. That was him. The thought had taken root in his mind, a dark seed that grew with each passing day. He set the glass down and opened his laptop. The screen glowed with a map of the San Juan Mountains, a rugged expanse of peaks and valleys that stretched for miles. He'd been researching a location, a place where accidents were plausible, where a tragedy could unfold without raising suspicion. A hiking trail, perhaps, or a scenic overlook with a steep drop. He needed something remote, somewhere. The authorities wouldn't look too closely. The plan was forming, piece by piece. He would propose a trip, a father-daughter getaway to reconnect. Emily would resist, of course, she always did, but he'd find a way to persuade her. He had to. Time was running out. Emily wasn't asleep when the knock came at her door. That evening, she was sitting up in bed, a notebook balanced on her lap, scribbling thoughts she didn't dare say aloud. The knock was soft, almost hesitant, and she knew it wasn't James. He never knocked like that. "Come in," she called. The door opened and Rosa, the housekeeper, stepped inside. Rosa was a stout woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes, and a quiet strength that Emily had come to rely on. She'd been with the family for years, a constant presence through Margaret's illness and Emily's recovery. "Miss Emily," Rosa said, her voice low, "I brought you some tea, chamomile, to help you sleep." Emily managed a small smile. "Thanks, Rosa. You don't have to keep doing this, you know." Rosa set the tray on the bedside table, her hands moving with practiced ease. "It's no trouble. Besides, someone has to look after you." There was a weight to her words, a subtle warning that Emily didn't miss. Rosa had never said it outright, but Emily knew she didn't trust James. There had been moments, glances, exchanged, conversations cut short, where Rosa's suspicion was clear. Emily wanted to ask, to press her for the truth, but fear held her back. What if Rosa confirmed what she already suspected? What if her father was more than just cold, more than just distant? "Rosa," Emily said, hesitating, "do you ever feel like something's wrong? In this house, I mean?" Rosa's hands stilled, and for a moment she didn't meet Emily's eyes. When she finally looked up, her expression was guarded. "This is an old house, mija. Old houses carry heavy things, grief, secrets. They settle into the walls." Emily nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to say more, to tell Rosa about the nightmares that plagued her, about the memories of the accident that felt more like accusations, but the words wouldn't come. "Get some rest," Rosa said, squeezing Emily's shoulder gently. "You're stronger than you know." After Rosa left, Emily stared at the notebook in her lap. She'd been writing about her mother, about the stories Margaret used to tell her. But tonight her pen had wandered, tracing a single question over. "What did you see, Mom? What did you know?" The next morning, James found Emily in the dining room, a rare occurrence. She usually took her meals in her room or the library, avoiding him whenever possible. But today she was there, her wheelchair positioned at the head of the long mahogany table. The room was bathed in pale light, the windows framing a view of the snow-dusted pines. "Good morning," James said, his tone carefully neutral. He took a seat across from her, unfolding a napkin with deliberate care. "Sleep well?" Emily didn't answer right away. She was studying him, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "Fine," she said finally. "You?" He shrugged, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Well enough. I was thinking, Emily, maybe it's time we did something together, just the two of us." Her fork paused midway to her mouth. "Like what?" "A trip," he said, leaning back in his chair. "There's a lodge up near Telluride, right at the edge of the mountains. Beautiful views, fresh air. It could be good for us. A chance to start over." Emily's heart thudded in her chest. She set her fork down, her appetite gone. "A trip," she repeated, her voice flat. "Why now?" James's smile was practiced, the kind he used to charm investors. "Because you're my daughter, and I've been a lousy father. I want to fix that. I want us to be a family again." The word family felt like a blade, cutting through the fragile calm she'd built. She wanted to scream, to throw his words back in his face. A family? They hadn't been a family since the night he'd driven them off that road, since the moment her mother's screams had been silenced by the crunch of metal. But she didn't scream. She didn't move. She just watched him, searching for the lie in his eyes. "I'll think about it," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded as if satisfied. "That's all I ask." But as he sipped his coffee, Emily's mind was racing. She didn't trust him, not his words, not his smile, not the sudden warmth in his voice. And yet, a part of her wondered if she was wrong. What if he was telling the truth? What if this was his way of reaching out, of trying to mend what was broken? The thought didn't last long. Deep down, she knew better. James Harper didn't change. He manipulated, he schemed, and whatever he was planning, she needed to be ready. The days following James's proposal of a father-daughter trip were a study in calculated silence. Emily moved through the mansion like a ghost, her wheelchair gliding over polished hardwood floors, her mind a battlefield of doubt and determination. She wanted to believe her father's intentions were genuine, that somewhere beneath his polished exterior was the man who had once taught her to ride a bike, his laughter echoing through the summer air. But the memory felt like a relic, too fragile to trust. Every glance from James, every forced smile, carried the weight of something unspoken, something dangerous. In the library, surrounded by her mother's books, Emily pored over her notebook, its pages filled with fragmented thoughts and questions. She'd started documenting everything, James's words, his sudden shifts in behavior, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. It was a habit she'd picked up from Margaret, who had always said, "Write it down, Emily. The truth hides in the details." If James was planning something, she needed to be ready. She needed proof. Outside, the Colorado winter tightened its grip. Snow fell in heavy sheets, blanketing the estate in a silence that felt both serene and oppressive. The San Juan Mountains loomed beyond the windows, their peaks shrouded in mist, a reminder of how isolated the Harper mansion truly was. The nearest town, Silverton, was a 40-minute drive down winding roads, and the estate's only regular. Visitors were Rosa and the occasional delivery driver. Emily had once loved the solitude, the way it made the world feel vast and untouched. Now, it felt like a cage. James, meanwhile, was meticulous. In his study, he pored over maps and weather. reports, his laptop screen casting a cold glow across his face. The lodge he'd mentioned to Emily was real, a rustic retreat near Telluride perched on the edge of a rugged canyon. It was perfect, remote, scenic, and treacherous. The trails around the lodge were notorious for their steep drops and unstable terrain, the kind of place where accidents were not just plausible but expected. A fall, a misstep, a wheelchair veering off a path, it would be tragic, but no one would question it. Not in a place like that. He'd spent hours crafting the narrative. He would play the grieving father, distraught over his daughter's loss. The police would investigate, of course, but the terrain would be their ally. A storm was forecast for the weekend he'd chosen, heavy snow that would obscure tracks and complicate any search. By the time anyone thought to look deeper, the evidence would be buried under feet of powder. The only variable was Emily herself. She was sharper than he'd anticipated, her suspicion a wall he couldn't breach. He'd tried charm, feigning remorse for the years of distance between them, but her responses were guarded, her eyes always searching for the lie. It infuriated him, the way she saw through him, the way she carried Margaret's defiance in her. Blood, but it also made her predictable. She would resist the trip, and he would use that resistance to his advantage. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, swirling the bourbon in his glass. The plan was simple, but simplicity was its strength. He would convince her to go one way or another, and if she refused, well, there were other ways to ensure she ended up in those mountains. Emily's opportunity to uncover more came unexpectedly. It was a Thursday morning, grey and frigid, when Rosa arrived later than usual, her coat dusted with snow. She found Emily in the kitchen, sipping tea and staring at the frost patterns on the window. "Morning, mija," Rosa said, unwrapping her scarf. Her voice was warm, but there was a tension in her movements, a slight tremor in her hands as she set her bag down. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Rosa hesitated, then nodded. "Just the roads. Slippery. Today!" She busied herself at the counter, unpacking groceries, but Emily noticed the way her gaze darted toward the hallway, as if checking for James. "Rosa," Emily said, lowering her voice, "if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know." Rosa's hands froze, a jar of jam suspended in midair. For a moment, Emily thought she might brush it off, offer another vague platitude about old houses and heavy secrets. But then Rosa set the jar down and turned, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. "Not here," she whispered. "Your father—" "He's in his study, but we can't risk it. Meet me in the greenhouse at noon. No one goes there in winter." Emily nodded, her pulse quickening. The greenhouse, a glass-domed structure behind the mansion, had been Margaret's pride, filled with roses and orchids she'd tended with care. Since her death, it had fallen into neglect, its plants withered under a layer of frost. It was the perfect place for a conversation no one else could hear. The hours until noon crawled by. Emily stayed in the kitchen, pretending to read, her mind racing with possibilities. Rosa knew something. Something about James, about the accident, maybe even about Margaret's death. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also ignited a spark of hope. If she could uncover the truth, she might find a way to protect herself. At 11:45, she wheeled herself to the back door, bundling up in a thick coat and scarf. The ramp James had installed after the accident, more for appearances than genuine care, made it possible for her to navigate the path to the greenhouse, though the snow made it treacherous. She moved slowly, her breath clouding in the air, the wheels of her chair crunching through the icy crust. The greenhouse loomed ahead, its glass panels fogged with condensation. Emily pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the air was damp and cold, the scent of decayed, earth-heavy. Dead vines clung to the trellises, their leaves brittle and brown. Rosa was already there, standing near a cracked stone bench, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Close the door," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily complied, her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from anticipation. "What is it, Rosa? What's going on?" Rosa glanced at the door, then stepped closer, her eyes searching Emily's face. "I've wanted to tell you for a long time, mija, but I was afraid. For you, for me, your father, He's not what he seems. Emily's heart thudded.
I know that. I've known it since the accident. But what do you know? What did you see?
Rosa took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she spoke.
The night of the crash, I wasn't supposed to be there.
I'd gone to the house to drop off some papers for your mother. I saw your father's car pull out, you in the back seat. He was driving fast, too fast for those roads, and his face— She paused, her eyes distant. It wasn't the face of a man worried about his daughter. It was empty, like he'd made up his mind about something. Emily's hands gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. You think he meant to crash? That it wasn't an accident? I don't know, Rosa admitted, her voice breaking. But when you were in the hospital, he didn't act like a father. He was angry, not sad. And your mother? She started asking questions. She hired someone, a private investigator, to look into it. She never told me what they found. But she changed after that. She stopped trusting him. Emily's mind reeled. A private investigator. Her mother had suspected James just as she did, but if Margaret had found proof, where was it? Why hadn't she acted on it before her illness took her? There's more, Rosa said, her voice dropping even lower. A few weeks ago I overheard him on the phone. He was talking to someone about the will, about how it had to be taken care of before your birthday. I didn't understand it all, but the way he said it scared me, Emily. He's planning something. This trip he's talking about, it's not what he says it is. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, hearing Rosa's fear, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Her father wasn't just distant or greedy, he was dangerous. What do I do? Emily asked, her voice small. If he's planning something, how do I stop him? Rosa knelt beside her, taking her hands. You stay sharp, Mija. You watch him just like you've been doing. And you don't go on that trip no matter what he says. I'll help you. We'll find a way. Emily nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. She couldn't just refuse the trip. James would find another way, another opportunity. She needed to outsmart him, to turn his plan against him. And she needed proof, something concrete to take to Clara Bennett, the lawyer, or the police. Thank you, Rosa, she said, squeezing the older woman's hands. For telling me, for trusting me. Rosa's eyes welled with tears. Your mother would be so proud of you. You're strong, Emily, stronger than he knows. They parted ways, Rosa slipping back to the mansion to avoid suspicion, Emily lingering in the greenhouse for a few minutes longer. She stared at the withered roses, their petals curled and lifeless, and felt a surge of resolve. Her mother had fought for the truth, and now it was her turn. James's patience was wearing thin. Emily's reluctance was expected, but her silence, her watchful eyes were starting to unnerve him. He'd caught her looking at him during dinner the previous night, her gaze steady and unyielding, as if she were peeling back his carefully constructed facade. It was a look Margaret used to give him, one that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. He hated it. He needed to act quickly. The weather forecast was holding. A storm was due to hit the Telluride area in 3 days, perfect for his plan. He'd booked the lodge, a private cabin with a view of the canyon, under the pretense of a family retreat. The staff had been accommodating, assuring him the trails were accessible for wheelchairs, though they'd warned about the steep drop-offs. He'd nodded solemnly, playing the concerned father, but inwardly he'd been thrilled. The drop-offs were exactly what he needed. The challenge was getting Emily to agree. He'd tried the emotional angle, appealing to their shared grief, but it had fallen flat. She was too guarded, too suspicious. He needed leverage, something to force her hand. The answer came to him that evening as he sat in his study, reviewing the estate's financial records. Emily wasn't just inheriting money. She was inheriting control of Harper Enterprises, the company he'd poured his life into. If he could convince her that the trip was about the business, about preparing her for her future role, she might relent. She was smart, ambitious in her own quiet way. She'd want to understand the empire she was about to inherit. He crafted the pitch carefully, weaving truth and lies into a seamless narrative. The lodge wasn't just a retreat, it was a chance to meet with key investors, to discuss the company's future. He'd frame it as an opportunity for her to step into her mother's shoes to prove she was ready for the responsibility. And if that didn't work, he had a backup plan. Guilt. He'd remind her of the years they'd lost, of the pain he'd endured after Margaret's death. He'd make her feel like refusing was a betrayal. Emily sensed the shift in James's approach. The moment he walked into the library the next morning, he was carrying a folder, its edges worn, and his smile was softer, almost genuine. She braced herself, her notebook tucked beneath a cushion, her expression neutral. "Morning, Emily," he said, settling into an armchair across from her. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about the trip." She didn't respond, letting him fill the silence. He always did. "I know you're not thrilled about it," he continued, "but I wasn't entirely honest about why I want us to go. It's not just about us. It's about the company, your mother's legacy." Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. "The company?" He nodded, opening the folder and sliding it across the table. It contained charts, financial reports, names of investors she vaguely recognized. "When you turn 18, you'll be taking over Harper Enterprises. That's a big responsibility, and you need to be prepared. There's a meeting at the lodge with some of our biggest stakeholders. They want to meet you to see the future of the company." She glanced at the papers, her mind racing. It was plausible. Too plausible. Her mother had always talked about the company, about its roots in their family, its importance to the community. But something about James's tone, the way his eyes never left her face, set her nerves on edge. "And you think I'm ready for that?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm 17. I'm in a wheelchair." "What do they expect?" "From me?" "They expect you to be your mother's daughter," James said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Margaret was brilliant, and so are you. This is your chance to show them that." Emily's throat tightened. The mention of her mother was a calculated move, and it stung. She wanted to believe him, to believe this was about her future, but Rosa's words echoed in her mind. He's planning something. She couldn't ignore the timing, the sudden urgency. 3 months until her birthday, until the will took effect. 3 months until James lost everything. "I'll think about it," she said, echoing her response from before. "But I need more than promises, Dad. I need to know this is real." James's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, I'll arrange for Clara to send you the details. Agendas, guest lists, whatever." You're in charge, Emily. That's what your mother wanted." She nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. She'd call Clara herself, verify the meeting, check every detail. If James was lying, she'd find out. And if he wasn't, well, she'd deal with that when the time came. That night, Emily sat by her bedroom window, the phone pressed to her ear. Clara Bennett's voice was calm, professional, but there was a warmth to it that put Emily at ease. "I haven't heard anything about a meeting in Telluride," Clara said, her tone cautious. "But I'll look into it. Your father doesn't have direct access to the company's board, not since your mother's will was finalized. If he's organizing something, it's outside the usual channels." Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "Can you check the will again? See if there's anything that might make him desperate?" There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. "I can't discuss the specifics over the phone, Emily, but I can tell you this. Your mother was very clear about her wishes. You're the sole beneficiary, and there are safeguards in place to protect you. If you're worried about your father, you need to tell me. I can help." Emily hesitated. She wanted to tell Clara everything. Rosa's story, her own suspicions, the trip that felt like a trap, but she needed more than suspicions. She needed evidence, something Clara could use to build a case. "Just check on the meeting," she said finally. "And keep this between us, okay?" "Of course," Clara replied. "I'll call you tomorrow." Emily hung up, her heart pounding. She was walking a tightrope, balancing between caution and action. If she refused the trip outright, James would know she was onto him. If she went along with it, she was stepping into his game, where he held all the cards. But there was a third option, one she was only beginning to consider. Play the game on her terms. She opened her notebook and began to write, her pen moving quickly. She listed every detail of James's behavior, every word he'd said about the trip, every discrepancy she'd noticed. Then she turned to a new page and wrote a single word: plan. The mansion felt smaller with each passing day, its walls closing in like the jaws of a trap. Emily moved through its halls with a quiet intensity, her wheelchair a silent partner in her growing resolve. James's proposal of the Telluride trip hung over her like a storm cloud, its shadow darkening every interaction. She'd told him she'd think about it, but the decision was already made. She would go. Not out of trust, not out of hope, but because she knew the only way to expose her father was to step into his game and rewrite the rules. Her conversation with Rosa in the greenhouse had lit a fire in her, a determination to uncover the truth. About James, the accident, and her mother's suspicions, but determination alone wasn't enough. She needed a plan, one that accounted for every variable, every risk. If James was plotting to harm her, she had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than he was. The thought scared her, not because of the danger, but because it meant confronting. The man who was supposed to protect her, the man who was her father, in name only. Emily spent the next 2 days gathering information. She called Clara Bennett again, pressing for details about the supposed meeting at the lodge. Clara's response was measured but concerning. No record of any investor meeting existed in Harper Enterprises' official schedule. The board hadn't been informed of any trip, and James's name hadn't appeared in recent correspondence. "It's possible he's arranging something independently," Clara said, her voice tight, "but it's irregular. I'll dig deeper, Emily, but be careful. If you feel unsafe, you need to tell me." Emily thanked her and hung up, her mind racing. Clara's caution only confirmed what she already suspected. The meeting was a fabrication, a lure to get her to Telluride. But knowing that wasn't enough. She needed evidence, something to prove James's intent beyond a shadow of a doubt. She turned to her notebook, its pages now a map of her father's lies, and began sketching a strategy. She would go on the trip, but she wouldn't go alone. Not in spirit, at least. Rosa would be her eyes in the background, and Clara would be her lifeline to the outside world. And there was one more piece she needed to put in place, a way to document everything. In the quiet of her room, Emily rummaged through a box of her mother's belongings, items she'd kept hidden from James. Among the letters and photographs was a small voice recorder, a device Margaret had used to dictate notes for the company. Emily tested it, her heart pounding as the red light blinked on. It still worked, its battery miraculously intact. She slipped it into a zippered pocket of her wheelchair, along with a spare battery she found in a drawer. If James said anything incriminating, she'd capture it. If he acted, she'd have a record. It wasn't foolproof, but it was a start. She also began preparing physically. The accident had taken her legs, but not her strength. Years of physical therapy had built her upper body, and she'd learned to navigate her wheelchair with precision. She practiced maneuvering over uneven surfaces in the mansion's courtyard, testing how much control she had on gravel and ice. The trails around the lodge would be rougher, she knew, but she needed to be ready for anything, especially escape. Rosa was her ally in this, though their conversations were brief and coded to avoid suspicion. Over cups of tea in the kitchen, they spoke in whispers, planning how Rosa could help without drawing James's attention. Rosa agreed to stay in touch with Clara, passing along any updates Emily sent. She also gave Emily a small, prepaid cell phone, one she'd bought in Silverton, with cash. "It's not traceable," Rosa said, pressing it into Emily's hand. "If you need to call for help, use this. Not your regular phone, he might be watching." The idea that James could be monitoring her phone sent a chill down Emily's spine, but it wasn't surprising. He was meticulous, a man who left nothing to chance. She thanked Rosa, tucking the phone into her coat pocket, and made a mental note to keep her regular phone for innocuous calls only. James, meanwhile, was finalizing his own preparations. The lodge was booked, the cabins stocked with supplies, and the weather forecast remained promisingly grim. A blizzard was expected to sweep through the San Juan Mountains on Saturday night, the second day of their trip. He'd chosen a trail near the lodge, a narrow path that wound along the edge of a canyon known as Devil's Drop. The name was fitting. A sheer cliff plunged hundreds of feet to a river below, its waters hidden by mist and jagged rocks. A wheelchair veering off the path would be catastrophic, and the storm would erase any evidence of foul play. He'd rehearsed the scenario in his mind. A walk to enjoy the view, a moment of distraction, a gentle push. Emily's wheelchair was heavy, but he was strong, and gravity would do the rest. He'd wait until the storm was at its peak when visibility was near zero to ensure no one saw them. Afterward, he'd stumble back to the lodge, frantic and tearful, claiming she'd lost control on the icy path. The police would search, but the snow would cover her tracks, and the river would likely carry her body far downstream. By the time spring thawed the canyon, there'd be nothing left to find. The only loose end was Emily's suspicion. She'd agreed to the trip after their last conversation, her voice quiet but resolute, but he didn't trust her compliance. She was too. Much like Margaret, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He needed to keep her off balance, to ensure she didn't have time to plan or seek help. To that end, he decided to accelerate the timeline. Instead of leaving on Friday, as he'd originally told her, they'd depart tomorrow, Thursday morning. The sudden change would give her less time to prepare, less time to doubt. He found her in the library that evening, her wheelchair parked by the fireplace, a book open on her lap. The firelight cast shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the intensity in her eyes. For a moment he saw Margaret in her, and the resemblance stirred a flicker of guilt. He pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. "Emily," he said, forcing a smile. "I've got some news. The investors want to meet earlier than planned. We need to leave for Telluride tomorrow morning." Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Tomorrow? You said Friday." "No," he said, his tone apologetic. "But they're flying in from Denver, and their schedule's shifted." "It's a great opportunity, Emily. You'll make a strong impression." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "What time?" "Early. 7 o'clock. I've already arranged for the car and packed most of what we'll need. You just bring yourself." Emily nodded slowly, her fingers tightening on the book. "Fine. I'll be ready." James felt a surge of triumph, though he kept his face neutral. "Good. Get some rest tonight. It's a long drive." As he left the library, he didn't see the way Emily's hand slipped to the pocket of her wheelchair, her fingers brushing the voice recorder. He didn't hear the soft click as she pressed the record button, capturing the silence that followed his departure. Sleep eluded Emily that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of fear and focus. The sudden change in plans was no coincidence. James was trying to rattle her, to keep her from thinking clearly. But she was ready. Her bag was packed, the voice recorder and prepaid phone hidden in a secret compartment of her wheelchair. She'd written a letter to Clara detailing her suspicions and James's behavior, and given it to Rosa to mail if anything went wrong. It wasn't enough to convict him, but it was a start, a breadcrumb trail for someone to follow. At 5 in the morning, she wheeled herself to the kitchen where Rosa was waiting. The housekeeper's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "You don't have to do this, Mija," she said, pouring Emily a cup of coffee. "You can stay here, call the police, tell them everything." Emily shook her head. "They won't believe me without proof. He's too good at covering his tracks." "I have to go, Rosa. It's the only way to catch him." Rosa's hands trembled as she set the coffee down. "Then you promise me you'll be careful. You call Clara the second anything feels wrong, and you keep that phone hidden." "I will," Emily said, her voice firm. "And you keep Clara in the loop. If I don't check in by Saturday night, you know what to do." Rosa nodded, pulling Emily into a fierce hug. "You're brave, Mija. Your mother's watching over you." Emily clung to her for a moment, drawing strength from the embrace. Then she pulled back, her jaw set. Let's do this. The drive to Telluride was a 4-hour journey through winding mountain roads, the landscape a blur of snow-covered pines and granite cliffs. James drove the black SUV, his hands steady on the wheel, while Emily sat in the passenger seat, her wheelchair secured in the back. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Emily kept her eyes on the road, her mind alert for any sign of danger. She'd memorized the route, thanks to a map she'd studied the night before, and noted every turn, every mile marker. If James tried anything on the drive, a staged accident, a sudden detour, she'd be ready to act. The voice recorder was on, hidden in her coat pocket, capturing every word, every pause. James, for his part, seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. "Beautiful country, isn't it?" he said, glancing at her. "Your mother loved these mountains. Used to drag us out here every summer." Emily's stomach twisted at the mention of her mother, but she kept her voice even. "Yeah." "She did?" He chuckled, a sound that grated on her nerves. "You're like her, you know, stubborn, smart. She'd be proud of you, taking on the company. Like this." The words were meant to disarm her, to lower her guard, but they only sharpened her focus. She nodded, letting him talk, knowing every word was being recorded. If he slipped, if he hinted at his true intentions, she'd have it on tape. The lodge came into view just after noon, a timber-framed building perched on a ridge overlooking the canyon. Its windows glowed warmly against the gray sky, a deceptive promise of comfort. James parked the SUV and helped Emily into her wheelchair, his hands lingering a moment too long on her shoulders. She shrugged him off, wheeling herself toward the entrance, her heart pounding. The lobby was rustic, with a stone fireplace and antler chandeliers, but Emily barely noticed. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for signs of the supposed investors. There were a few guests, hikers in heavy coats, a couple sipping coffee by the fire, but no one who looked like a corporate executive. Her suspicion deepened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Looks like they're not here yet," James said, checking his watch. "Probably delayed by the weather. Let's get settled in the cabin." The cabin was a short distance from the main lodge, a secluded structure with a wraparound porch and a view of Devil's Drop. Emily's stomach churned as she saw the canyon, its depths hidden by a veil of mist. This was it, the place where James planned to act. She could feel it in the air, a tension that crackled like static. Inside, the cabin was cozy, with a wood-burning stove and plush furniture, but Emily felt no warmth. She wheeled herself to the window, pretending to admire the view while her mind raced. She needed to stay one step ahead, to anticipate his move. The storm was coming, and with it, the moment of truth. That evening, James suggested a short walk, to stretch their legs before dinner. Emily's pulse spiked, but she agreed, knowing refusal would tip him off. She checked the voice recorder, ensuring it was still running, and tucked the prepaid phone deeper into her pocket. The trail he chose was relatively flat, a loop around the lodge, but it skirted close to the canyon's edge. She gripped the wheels of her chair tightly, her muscles tensed for action. The air was bitter, the wind carrying flakes of snow that stung her face. James walked beside her, his hands in his pockets, his demeanor casual. "Nice to get out, isn't it?" he said, his voice almost lost in the wind. "Clears the head," Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the path ahead. The trail was narrow, the ground uneven, and the drop-off was closer than she'd expected. She could hear the river below, a distant roar that sent a shiver down her spine. "Careful here," James said, his hand brushing her chair as if to steady it. "It's a bit slick." His touch was light, but it felt like a warning. Emily's heart raced, her fingers tightening on the wheels. She needed to keep him talking, to draw him out. "Dad," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Why? Are we really here? No one's shown up. No investors, no meeting. What's going on?" James's step faltered just for a moment, but he recovered quickly. They'll be here," he said, his tone smooth. "You worry too much, Emily. Just enjoy the moment." She didn't respond, letting the silence stretch. The recorder was running, capturing every word, every nuance. If he was going to act, it would be soon. The storm was closing in, the sky darkening, and the trail was leading them closer to the edge. The wind screamed through the San Juan Mountains, a banshee's wail that drowned out the world. Snow fell in relentless sheets, blurring the line between earth and sky, transforming the trail along Devil's Drop into a treacherous ribbon of ice and shadow. Emily gripped the wheels of her chair, her fingers numb despite her gloves, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. The canyon loomed, to her right, its depths invisible through the storm, but she could feel its pull, a yawning void that whispered of finality. James walked beside her, his silhouette barely discernible in the swirling white, his presence a weight heavier than the blizzard itself. This was it, the moment she'd dreaded, the moment she'd prepared for. The voice recorder hummed softly in her coat pocket, capturing every gust, every crunch of snow under James's boots. The prepaid phone, tucked deeper in her wheelchair's compartment, was her lifeline. Though she doubted it would get a signal in this storm, she'd agreed to this walk, knowing it was a trap because she needed to catch him in the act. Words alone wouldn't convict him. She needed action, intent, something undeniable. But now, with the canyon's edge mere feet away, fear clawed at her resolve. What if she'd miscalculated? What if she wasn't ready? James's voice cut through, the wind deceptively calm. "Careful, Emily. The path narrows here. Stay close to me." She didn't respond. Her eyes locked on the trail. The ground was slick, studded with rocks that jolted her chair with every turn of the wheels. She'd practiced for this, maneuvering over rough terrain, but the storm changed everything. Her arms ached from the effort, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She glanced at James, his face obscured by the hood of his parka, but she could sense his focus, the way his body angled toward her, poised like a predator waiting for the right moment. "Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Tell me the truth. There's no meeting, is there? No investors? Why are we really here?" The question hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. She'd asked it before in the cabin, but now, with the storm raging and the canyon waiting, it carried a different weight. She needed him to talk, to reveal something the recorder could capture. If he acted, she needed his words to betray him. James slowed, turning to face her. The snow clung to his hood, framing his eyes, cold, calculating, but with a flicker of something else. Annoyance? Amusement? "You're too smart for your own good, Emily," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the wind. "Just like your mother." Her heart lurched. "What does that mean? What did you do to her?" He laughed, a harsh sound that grated against the storm. "You think I did something to Margaret? She was sick, Emily. The cancer took her. You know that." "Do I?" she shot back, her voice rising. "You were there, Dad. The accident, her illness, now this trip. It's all you. I know about the will. I know you get nothing unless I'm gone." For a moment he was silent, his eyes narrowing. She'd struck a nerve, and the realization sent a surge of adrenaline through her. "Keep him talking," she thought. "Keep him off balance. You've been talking to that lawyer, haven't you?" James said, stepping closer. His voice was tighter now, laced with anger. "Clara's been filling your head with nonsense. You think I'd hurt you? My own daughter?" "Then why are we here?" she demanded, her hands tightening on the wheels. "Why this trail, this storm? If it's not about the will, then what?" He took another step, closing the distance between them. The canyon was inches away now, the drop-off a black line in the snow. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I brought you here to protect you. From yourself, from the pressure of that damn company. You're not ready for it, Emily. You're 17, crippled, grieving. You think you can handle millions, run an empire? I'm trying to save you." The words were a lie, slick and practiced, but they stung. She hated how they echoed her own doubts, the fears she'd buried deep. "Save me?" she said, her voice shaking with fury.
Like you saved me 3 years ago? I remember, Dad. The car, the road, your voice. You weren't saving me then, and you're not now. His face changed then, the mask slipping. The calm, father was gone, replaced by something raw, something dangerous. You should have died that night, he said, the words venomous, unmistakable. It would have been easier for everyone. The confession was a blade, cutting through her last shred of hope. She pressed her thumb against the recorder, ensuring it was still running, her heart pounding so loud she feared he'd hear it. "Say it again," she said, her voice steady now, fueled by rage. "Say you meant to kill me." James stared at her, his breath visible in the freezing air. Then he smiled, a cold, predatory thing. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. "But it doesn't matter. No one's coming for you out here." Before she could react, his hands were on her chair, gripping the handles. He shoved, hard, and the world tilted. The wheels skidded on the ice, sliding toward the edge. Emily screamed, her hands scrabbling for control, but the momentum was too strong. The canyon yawned below, a hungry mouth ready to swallow her whole. Instinct took over. She threw her weight to the left, locking the wheels with every ounce of strength she had. The chair tipped, teetering on the brink, one wheel spinning over empty air. James pushed again, his face a mask of determination, but the storm was her ally now. The wind gusted, throwing snow in his eyes, and she seized the moment. With a desperate heave, she yanked the chair back, the wheels catching on a rock, just inches from the drop. James stumbled, caught off guard by her resistance. "Damn it," he muttered, lunging forward to grab the chair again. But Emily was ready. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the prepaid phone, and hurled it at his face. It struck his cheek, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make him flinch, giving her a precious second. She spun the chair, her arms burning, and propelled herself back toward the trail's center. The ground was uneven, the snow deep, but she didn't stop. She could hear James behind her, his boots crunching, his breath ragged with fury. "Emily!" he roared. "You can't run from me!" But she wasn't running. She was fighting. The trail sloped slightly upward, toward the lodge, and she pushed with everything she had, her muscles screaming. The storm was a wall of white, obscuring the path, but she'd memorized the route, counting the seconds, the turns. The lodge was a quarter-mile away, maybe less. If she could reach it, if she could find someone, anyone, she might survive. James was gaining, his footsteps. Closer now. She risked a glance back, saw his silhouette through the snow, his arms outstretched. He was fast, unencumbered by a chair, but she had something he didn't: desperation. She reached the fork in the trail where it split toward the lodge, or deeper into the canyon, and veered left, praying the storm would slow him. Then she heard it, a crack, sharp and sudden, like a bone snapping. The ground beneath her chair shifted, a slab of ice giving way. She screamed as the chair lurched, sliding sideways toward the edge again. This wasn't James's doing. It was the mountain itself, betraying her. She grabbed for anything. A rock, a root, but her gloves slipped on the ice. James was there in an instant, his hands on the chair. But this time, he didn't push. He pulled, yanking her back from the brink. For a fleeting moment, she thought he'd changed his mind, that some shred of humanity had surfaced. But his eyes told a different story. Cold, calculating, furious. "Not like this," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Not an accident. You don't get to die that easily." He dragged her chair back to the trail, his grip iron tight. Emily struggled, twisting in her seat, but he was too strong. The lodge was so close. She could see its lights flickering. Through the storm, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. James was in control now, and she was running out of options. "Stop fighting," he said, his voice low, almost paternal. "It's over, Emily. You can't win." But Emily wasn't done. She reached into her coat, her fingers closing around the voice recorder. It was still running, still capturing every word. If she couldn't escape, she could at least ensure his confession survived. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it into the snow, aiming for a cluster of rocks where it might stay hidden. It was a desperate move, but it was all she had. James didn't notice, his focus on the trail ahead. He was pulling her toward the canyon's deepest point, where the drop was sheer and the river roared below. The storm was at its peak, visibility gone, the world a chaos of white and wind. No one would see them, no one would hear. Emily's mind raced, searching for a way out. The prepaid phone was gone, the recorder lost, but she still had her strength, her will. She remembered her mother's words, whispered during those final days in the hospital. "You're stronger than you know, Emily. Don't let anyone take that from you." She clung to those words, letting them fuel her. As James dragged her closer to the edge, she made her move. She slammed her hands on the wheels, locking them, then threw her weight forward, tipping the chair onto its side. The sudden shift caught James off guard, and he stumbled, his grip loosening. Emily hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her shoulder, but she didn't stop. She crawled, dragging herself through the snow, her hands clawing at the frozen earth. James cursed, lunging for her, but the storm was her shield. The wind howled, blinding him, and she kept moving, inch by agonizing inch, toward the rocks where she'd thrown the recorder. If she could reach it, if she could hide, she might. Buy enough time for the storm to force him back to the lodge, but time was running out. James was on her now, his hands grabbing her coat, pulling her back. She screamed, kicking with her upper body, her arms flailing. Her hand struck something hard, a rock, jagged and loose. She gripped it, swinging with all her strength, and felt it connect with his knee. He grunted, staggering, and she crawled again, her breath ragged, her vision blurring. The canyon was close, too close. She could hear the river, feel the void pulling at her. James was back, his hands on her ankles, dragging her toward the edge. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice raw with rage. "It ends now!" And then, a miracle. A light pierced the storm. Faint but growing brighter, a voice called out, distant, muffled by the wind. "Hello, is someone there?" James froze, his hands still on her. Emily seized the moment, screaming with every ounce of air in her lungs. "Help! Over here! Help me!" The light grew closer, a flashlight beam cutting through the snow. James hesitated, then released her, stepping back. "Stay quiet," he hissed, his voice low, "or you'll regret it." But Emily didn't stop. She screamed again, her voice hoarse, desperate. The light was almost upon them now, and she could make out a figure, a man in a heavy coat, his face obscured by a scarf. "What's going on?" he shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. "Are you hurt?" James's demeanor shifted in an instant, the predator replaced by the concerned father. "My daughter. She slipped. Her chair went off the trail. I was trying to pull her back." Emily's heart sank. He was lying, spinning his story, and the stranger might believe him, but she wasn't done fighting. "He's lying!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "He tried to kill me! Please help me!" The man hesitated, his flashlight sweeping between them. Emily could see his eyes now, wide with confusion, but there was something else. Doubt. He stepped closer, kneeling beside her. "Miss, are you okay? What happened?" "He pushed me," Emily said, her voice trembling but clear. "He's my father, and he wants me dead. Please don't let him take me." James laughed, a forced, nervous sound. "She's confused, upset. The storm's got her scared. I'm trying to get her back to the lodge." The man looked from Emily to James, his expression hardening. "Stay where you are," he said to James, his voice firm. "I'm calling for help." James's face twisted, a flash of panic breaking through his facade. "There's no need for that," he said, stepping forward. "We're fine, just a misunderstanding." But the man was already pulling a radio from his coat, speaking into it. "This is Ranger Torres at Devil's Drop Trail. I've got a situation. Possible assault. Need backup and a medic now." James lunged, grabbing for the radio, but Torres was faster. He sidestepped, shoving James back, his hand on a holster at his hip. "Don't move," he said, his voice like steel. You're not going anywhere?" Emily's vision swam, the cold and pain catching up with her. She was still on the ground, snow seeping through her coat, but relief flooded her. She was alive. Someone had found her. James's plan had failed, at least for now. Torres knelt beside her again, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Hang on, miss," he said. "Help's coming. You're safe now." But Emily knew better. Safe was a fleeting thing, a moment before the next storm. She needed the recorder, the evidence that would bury James. She needed to get back to the lodge, to Clara, to Rosa. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next hours were a blur of lights and voices. Rangers and medics arrived, their faces grim as they navigated the storm. Emily was lifted onto a stretcher, her body trembling from cold and shock, and carried back to the lodge. James was restrained, his protests growing fainter as he was led. Away. The storm raged on, but inside the lodge, warmth seeped into Emily's bones, a stark contrast to the ice in her heart. She told her story to the rangers, her voice hoarse but steady, recounting James's words, his actions, the confession she'd captured. She begged them to search for the recorder, describing where she'd thrown it, but the storm made it impossible. "Tomorrow," one of the rangers promised. "We'll look as soon as it clears." Emily nodded, exhaustion pulling at her. She was safe for now, but James was still a threat. He'd lied his way out of trouble before, and she had no doubt he'd try again. She needed that recorder, and she needed Clara. As the medics checked her for injuries, she slipped her hand into her coat pocket, hoping against hope that the prepaid phone had somehow survived. It was gone, lost in the snow, but she wasn't alone. Ranger Torres stayed by her side, his presence a quiet reassurance. "You did good out there," he said, his voice gentle. "Not many people could have fought like that," Emily managed, a weak smile. "I had to," she said. "For my mom." The storm had passed by morning, leaving the San Juan Mountains draped in a deceptive calm. The snow lay thick and untouched, a pristine blanket that hid the violence of the previous night. Emily sat in the lodge's small infirmary, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Her body ached, bruises bloomed on her arms, her shoulder throbbed from the fall, but her mind was sharp, fueled by a single purpose, ensuring James paid for what he'd done. Ranger Torres had stayed with her through the night, his presence, a steady anchor in the chaos. He'd relayed her story to the Telluride Sheriff's Department, who had taken James into custody at the lodge. James had protested, spinning a tale of a tragic accident, claiming Emily's accusations were the delusions of a traumatized girl. But Torres hadn't bought it, and neither had the deputy who'd arrived with the medics. Emily's clarity, her unwavering account of the attack, had planted seeds of doubt in their minds. Still, she knew doubt wasn't enough. Without evidence, James's wealth and influence could buy him freedom. She needed the voice recorder, the one piece that could turn suspicion into certainty. "Miss Harper," Torres said, stepping into the infirmary. His face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes were kind. "The sheriff's team is heading out to search the trail now that the storm's cleared. I told them exactly where you said you threw the recorder. If it's there, they'll find it," Emily nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you, it's everything. His voice, what he said, it's all on there." Torres hesitated, then pulled up a chair beside her. "I've seen a lot out here, Emily. People get lost, make mistakes. But what you described, that's no mistake. You hold on to that strength. We'll get to the bottom of this." His words were a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't alone. She managed a small smile, though it felt fragile. "I'm trying. I need this to be over." "It will be," he said, his voice firm, "one way or another." The wait was agonizing. Emily stayed in the infirmary, her wheelchair parked by a window overlooking the canyon. The view was breathtaking in the daylight, the snow sparkling under a pale sun, but it filled her with dread. Devil's Drop was no longer just a place, it was a memory, etched into her bones. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the image of James's face, the cold certainty in his eyes as he'd pushed her toward the edge. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from Clara Bennett. Emily had reached her late the previous night, using the lodge's phone to recount everything. Clara had been calm but urgent, promising to drive to Telluride immediately with legal documents and a private investigator she trusted. Now, her voice crackled through the receiver, steady and determined. "Emily, I'm an hour out," Clara said. "I've spoken to the sheriff's department, and they're taking this seriously. Your father's being held for questioning, but they can't. Charge him without more evidence. Tell me about this recorder. How certain are you it captured what you need?" "It did," Emily said, her voice unwavering. "He admitted it, Clara. He said I should have died in the accident, that he brought me here to finish it. If they find it, it's enough to prove intent." Clara was silent for a moment, then said, "Good, that's good. I'm bringing everything we have on the will, the company, and your mother's investigation. She hired someone before she died, Emily, a man named Paul Grayson. He found inconsistencies in the accident report, things the police overlooked. If we can tie that to what happened last night, we'll have a case." Emily's heart leapt. Her mother's investigation, Rosa had mentioned it, but hearing Clara confirm it was like a spark reigniting her hope. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Grayson's report suggested the car's brakes were tampered with," Clara said. "The police dismissed it as wear and tear, but he wasn't convinced. Your mother wanted to pursue it, but her illness, it stopped her. I have his files, and I'm bringing him to Telluride. We'll build this case together." Emily gripped the phone, her mind racing. Tampered brakes. It wasn't just her memory, her fragmented nightmares. It was real. James had tried to kill her 3 years ago, and he'd tried again last night. The weight of it threatened to crush her, but she pushed it aside. Grief could wait. Justice couldn't. "Thank you, Clara," she said. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're stronger than you realize," Clara replied, echoing Rosa's words. "Stay safe until I get there. And Emily, don't talk to your father no matter what. He's dangerous, and he's desperate." "I won't," Emily promised, hanging up. She stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Stronger than you realize. She was starting to believe it. The search team returned just after noon, their faces red from the cold. Emily's heart sank when she saw their expressions, grim, apologetic. Torres met them in the lodge's lobby, and she wheeled herself over, her stomach twisting. "Did you find it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The lead ranger, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, shook her head. "We scoured the area you described, Miss Harper. Found some rocks, some disturbed snow, but no recorder. The storm might have buried it, or it could have slid into the canyon. We'll try again tomorrow, but it's a long shot." Emily's vision blurred, tears stinging her eyes. The recorder was her proof, her weapon. Without it, James's lies might hold. She forced herself to breathe, to focus. "Thank you for trying," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Please keep looking. We will," the ranger promised, but her tone lacked conviction. Torres placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "This isn't over," he said. "You're a witness, Emily. Your testimony carries weight. And if your lawyer's got more evidence, we'll use it." She nodded, but the loss of the recorder felt like a physical blow. She'd fought so hard, risked everything, and now it might not be enough. But she wasn't giving up. Clara was coming, and with her, the pieces of her mother's investigation. There was still a chance. Clara arrived at the lodge just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow. She was a tall woman in her 40s, with a no-nonsense air softened by warm brown eyes. Beside her was Paul Grayson, the private investigator, a wiry man with a weathered face and a quiet intensity. They found Emily in the lodge's dining room, where she'd been sipping tea, trying to keep her nerves in check. "Emily," Clara said, pulling her into a brief, fierce hug. "You're safe. That's what matters." "For now," Emily said, her voice low. "They didn't find the recorder. Without it, it's my word against his." Grayson spoke up, his voice gravelly but calm.
Your word's stronger than you.
Think, kid, and we've got more than that. Your mother gave me enough to start digging, and I've been at it ever since."
He set a folder on the table, its edges worn from handling.
Emily opened it, her hands trembling. Inside were photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. Her mother's handwriting, elegant and precise. There were pictures of the car after the accident, the brake lines clearly visible, and a mechanic's report highlighting irregularities. Another page detailed James's financial troubles at the time, debts he'd hidden from Margaret. And there, at the bottom, was a copy of an email from Margaret to Grayson, dated a month before her death. "If anything happens to me or Emily, it's James. Don't let him get away with it." Emily's breath caught, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her mother had known, had fought for her even as her strength faded. This is enough, right?" she asked, looking at Clara. "To prove he planned it?" "It's a start," Clara said, her voice firm. "Combined with your testimony and what happened last night, it's enough to charge him. Attempted murder, maybe more if we can link it to the accident. Grayson's been in touch with the sheriff. And they're pulling the old case files. We're building this, Emily, piece by piece." Grayson nodded. "Your father's good at covering his tracks, but he's not perfect. That email, the breaks, his behavior, it all adds up. And I've got a contact in Denver, a forensic accountant. If he's been siphoning money from the company, we'll find it." Emily wiped her eyes, a spark of hope igniting. "What do I do now?" "You rest," Clara said. "You've been through hell, and you need to take care of yourself. We'll handle the legal side, but we'll need you to testify when the time comes." "Can you do that?" Emily nodded, her jaw set. "I'll do whatever it takes." The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Emily stayed in Telluride under the protection of the sheriff's department, while Clara and Grayson worked tirelessly. The sheriff's team searched the trail again, but the recorder remained lost, likely buried or swept away by the river. Emily mourned its loss, but the evidence Clara and Grayson compiled was formidable. The mechanic's report on the brakes was corroborated by a second expert, and the forensic accountant uncovered transactions linking James to offshore accounts, suggesting he'd been planning to flee once he secured the inheritance. James, meanwhile, was held in a county jail, his charm and wealth useless against the mounting evidence. He hired a high-powered attorney who argued that Emily's accusations were the product of grief and trauma, but the email from Margaret was a damning blow. The sheriff's department reopened the investigation into the accident, and a warrant was issued to search James's office in Denver, where they found encrypted files detailing his financial schemes. Emily returned to the Harper mansion after a week, accompanied by Rosa, who had been frantic with worry. The reunion was tearful, Rosa pulling Emily into a hug that felt like home. "You did it, mija," she whispered. "You fought, and you won." "Not yet," Emily said, her voice quiet but resolute. "But I will." 3 months later, on the eve of her 18th birthday, Emily sat in a Denver courtroom, her wheelchair positioned beside Clara. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. James's attorney had tried to paint him as a grieving father, but Emily's testimony, clear, unflinching, had silenced the room. She recounted the accident, the years of suspicion, the night at Devil's Drop, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. The email from Margaret, read aloud by the prosecutor, was the final nail in James's coffin. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. James was sentenced to 25 years, his face pale as the judge's gavel fell. Emily watched him, searching for remorse, but found only defiance. He didn't look at her as he was led away, and she was glad. She didn't need his guilt. She had her own strength, her mother's legacy. The mansion felt different now, lighter, as if Margaret's spirit had finally found peace. Emily inherited the estate and Harper Enterprises on her birthday, stepping into her mother's role with a quiet determination. She worked with Clara to restructure the company, rooting out James's allies and rebuilding its foundation. Rosa stayed by her side, a constant presence, and Emily hired Grayson as a consultant,
ensuring the truth would always have a voice. She visited Devil's Drop one last time. On a clear spring day, the canyon bathed in sunlight. The trail was closed for repairs, but Torres, now a friend, accompanied her to the edge. She scattered a handful of rose petals, her mother's favorite, into the wind, watching them drift into the abyss. "For you, Mom," she whispered. "We did it." The wind carried her words away, and Emily turned her chair, heading back to the life she'd fought for. The scars would always be there, but so would her strength, a legacy forged in fire and truth. Thank you for joining the Pursuit Chronicles. Keep chasing your dreams and explore new horizons with us.